Afor was a small quiet and peaceful village hidden in the part of the Ase kingdom. The people there lived simple lives, farming, fetching water from the stream and sitting together in the evenings to gist. Everybody knew everybody, and in Afor, news traveled fast. If something happened to one person, by the next morning, the whole village would hear about it. But lately fear had settled over the village for some months. Now, young women were being found dead, one after the other. Nobody knew what was killing them, but one thing was always the same: the strange marks on their necks. They looked like snake bites, but nobody could say for sure. No one had ever seen a snake around the women when they died. It was as if the deaths were happening in secret, and that made it even more frightening. The village chief, Kunnel, sent hunters into the bush to find the snake, but they came back empty-handed. They found nothing. The deaths didn't stop, and the fear only grew stronger. Mothers started warning their daughters not to move around at night. Even in the daytime, women no longer felt safe. The once lively and peaceful village became quiet, and people didn't trust each other easily as before. But there was one person who didn't seem to care about all the fear. His name was Tund. If you ask any woman in Afor who the finest man in the village was, the answer was always Tund. Tund is a tall young man with a muscular body that showed all the hard work he did as a builder. His skin was smooth and dark, and his eyes shone like he always knew something you didn't know. His smile alone was enough to make a woman weak. Tund had the kind of charm that made women forget their fears when he walked through the village. The women would giggle and blush, hoping he would look their way. And when he did, it felt like the sun was shining only on them. Tund knew how to use his looks and sweet words. It wasn't just his fine face. It was the way he spoke, the way he moved, and the way he always seemed to be in control. He could make a woman feel like the only person in the world, but behind all that charm and beauty Tund carried a dangerous secret. He didn't care about the fear in the village. He didn't worry about the deaths either. He went about his day as if all was well, and he knew he was handsome, and he didn't hide it. He walked around the village with confidence. His head held high, and his eyes always searching for his next catch. The women of Afor were drawn to him like ants to sugar. Whether in the village, well, the market, or on the farm. As long as Tund was nearby, the women couldn't take their eyes off him. But it wasn't just about his looks. Tund had a way of talking that made any woman feel special. He knew the right things to say at the right time. His voice was deep and smooth like the calmness of a storm. And he always knew how to make a woman smile even when she was feeling down. He don't rush. Tund always take his time slowly, drawing them and making them trust him. Making them want him. If he wanted a woman, he would get her. It will only take one charming smile, a few sweet words. And in no distant time, she was his, and once he had her, he would take her to his hut at the edge of the village. Away from other eyes, under the soft glow of the moon. Tund would work his magic. He was gentle and patient, making each woman feel like she was the most important person in the world. But when the night grew darker, Tund would always ask the same strange question. Do you know the difference between a man's manhood and a snake? The women never knew what to say. They would laugh, thinking it was a joke, but before they could answer, Tund would whistle a soft eerie sound that seemed to float in the air. The women would feel uneasy, like something was about to happen. And that's when it did. Something would shift in the room, and before they could react, they would feel a cold, smooth touch on their skin. A snake, dark and dangerous, would slither out from Tund's trousers. The women always froze, their fear too strong to scream or run. The snake would wrap itself around them slowly, as if toying with its prey, then with a quick strike, it would bite them on the neck. The bite was always the same. Two sharp marks, like fangs sinking deep into their skin. The venom would spread quickly. The women would gasp, their bodies shaking as the poison took hold. Within minutes, It was over. They were dead. And Tund was left standing over their lifeless bodies, his face expressionless. By morning, the woman's body would be found in the village square, cold and pale with strange bite marks on her neck. The villagers would gather around shaking their heads wondering what kind of snake could do such a thing. But no one ever suspected Tund. He was too handsome. Too charming, too perfect. Each time another woman died, the fear in the village grew. But Tund didn't care. He continued his life as if nothing was happening. The women still blushed and giggled when he walked by, completely unaware of the danger that lurked beneath his good looks and sweet words. Life in a fort went on, even with the fear hanging over the village. The women were more cautious, especially at night. The daily routine of fetching water, farming, and trading continued. Every time a woman died, people would mourn, but nobody had any answers. The village chief, Colonel, tried to keep the people calm. But deep down, everyone knew that something was wrong and it wasn't just a normal snake causing these deaths. Then one day a new face appeared in the village. A woman named Becky. She was different from the other women in a fort. Tall and beautiful, with skin that shone like polished wood. Becky carried herself with confidence. Her beauty wasn't just in her face or body, but in the way she moved, as if she wasn't bothered by anything around her. She had come to visit her aunt, who lived on the edge of the village, and almost immediately, she caught Tund's attention. Tund noticed that at the first time he saw her at the well, unlike the other women who couldn't help but stare at him or blush when he passed by. Becky didn't seem impressed. She didn't giggle, she didn't stare. She didn't even smile at him. Instead, she looked straight past him. Her face calm, like she was in control of everything. This intrigued Tund. He wasn't used to being ignored by women, and Becky's calmness felt like a challenge to him. He has always been able to win over any woman he wanted, and he wasn't going to let Becky go. Becky was the first woman to resist him, and from that moment Tund decided that he had to have her. Tund began to watch Becky more closely. He noticed that she was always polite, but never too friendly. She spoke kindly to people, but she never allowed anyone to get too close to her. This only made Tund want her badly. He wasn't just interested in her beauty. He was fascinated by her mystery and by her strength. The more he watched her, the more determined he became. Tund wasn't used to failing, and he wasn't about to start now. He began to follow Becky, looking for opportunities to speak with her, so his voice could charm her, like he had done with so many others. But each time he approached her, Becky kept her distance, as if she knew something that he didn't. One afternoon, Tund found his chance. Becky was at the well filling her water pot, and there were fewer people around. Tund walked up to her with his usual confidence, smile on his face. "Becky," he said smoothly. His voice, deep and sweet. "Like honey, let me help you carry that." Becky glanced at him with a face expressionless. She didn't look impressed by his looks or his charm. And this only made Tund more eager. He waited for her to giggle or blush, like the others. But instead, she simply nodded. "If you insist," she said calmly, stepping back, to let him take the pot. Tund felt a small victory. He lifted the pot easily and placed it on his head, making sure to show off his strength. As they walked to her aunt's house, Tund tried to make small talk, but Becky remained quiet. She answered his questions politely, but didn't give him any more than necessary. This wasn't what Tund was used to. But he told himself it was only a matter of time before she will fall for him, as all other women eventually did. She's only playing hard to get. He just had to work a little harder with this one. After that day of the well, Tund couldn't get Becky out of his mind. She wasn't like the other women of a fort. Most of them would have melted under his smile, giggling and blushing, but not Becky. She was different. The more distant she remained, the more obsessed Tund became. He wasn't used to this, he wasn't used to a woman not giving him the attention he was used to. It was new. It was frustrating and it made him want her even more. Tund had always been able to get any woman he wanted with little effort, just a flash of his smile. A few smooth words and the women of a four were his, they were all the same soft, eager and easy to seduce. She wasn't falling for any of his tricks. She seemed immune to his charm. And this drove Tund crazy. Every day, Tund watched Becky. He watched her when she fetched water, when she walked through the market, even when she visited the farm with her aunt. Becky carried herself with a quiet strength that made her stand out. She didn't seem to care about anyone's opinion. Best of it all is that, she lived her life peacefully. And that only made her more attractive to Tund. Tund started finding excuses to talk to her. At first, it was little things, offering to help carry her load, trying to make small talk, trying to get her attention in any way he could. But no matter what he did, Becky stayed polite but distant herself. Her calmness was beginning to bother him. One evening Tund couldn't take it anymore. He decided that he needed to do more, he needed to take control of the situation. He couldn't let Becky continue to slip through his fingers. He had never failed with a woman before and he wasn't about to start now. Tund knew that Becky often visited her auntie's small farm just outside the village where they grew yams and vegetables. So, he decided to wait for her there. It was a warm evening and the sun was beginning to set, casting a soft orange glow over the fields. He leaned against a tree, his arms crossed over his chest. His eyes focused on the path leading to the farm. Finally, he saw her. Becky was walking slowly. Her steps steady and graceful. She was carrying a basket of yams on her head, while keeping a straight and calm face. As usual, as she approached, Tund stepped forward, blocking her path. "Becky," he said, his voice deep and smooth. "You've been avoiding me." Becky raised an eyebrow and looked up at him, not breaking her calm expression. "I've been doing no such thing, Tund. I've just been busy," she responded. This response irritated Tund. He wasn't used to being brushed off like this. He was used to women being excited to see him, not acting like he didn't matter. But he forced a smile, trying to keep his cool. "You're always so serious," he said, taking a step closer. "Why don't you let me walk with you? We could get to know each other better." Becky gave him a long look, her face still unreadable. For a moment, Tund thought she might actually agree, but then she shook her head, stepping forward, leavening him behind. "I'm not interested, Tund," she said. Tund stood there, stunned. He wasn't sure if he was more shocked or angry. How could she just walk away from him, like that? Nobody had ever said no to him like this. His pride felt bruised, but more than that, his obsession with Becky grew even stronger. He couldn't let her slip away so easily. She would be his, no matter what it takes. As Becky walked away, Tund's eyes darkened. He made a promise to himself right there. He would have her and she wouldn't be able to resist him for long. Tund's frustration grew as Becky continued to resist him. He was used to women falling for him quickly, but Becky wasn't like the others. The more she ignored his advances, the more obsessed he became. He knew he had to change his approach to win her over. This time he decided to be patient, to play the long game. Instead of showering her with attention like before, Tund pulled back. He stopped following her around and barely spoke to her, even when they crossed paths. It didn't take long for Becky to notice the change. She had expected him to keep trying, but now he seemed distant, almost uninterested. The shift in Tund behavior worked. After days of watching him from a distance, Becky became curious. She approached him one evening as he sat outside his hut sharpening his tools. "You've been quiet lately," she remarked, her tone calm, but curious. Tund simply nodded, keeping his answers short and his face expressionless. He knew this would draw her in. After a few moments of silence, Tund suggested a walk and Becky agreed. They talked occasionally as they walked. Tund kept the conversation light, just enough to keep her comfortable. He wanted her to believe that he was a changed man and that he was more than the charming attention-seeking womanizer. She had assumed. And slowly, it seemed to work. Tund had played his cards right. And now Becky's defenses were lowering, she no longer looked at him with suspicion. Tund could sense that the moment he had been waiting for was near, his patience had paid off. One evening, as the sun was setting over the village, Tund decided it was time to act. He invited Becky to his hut, saying they could share a quiet evening together. Becky, now more comfortable around him, agreed. The air was still and the village seemed almost too quiet as they made their way to his hut on the outskirts of a fort. Inside the hut, their light from a small oil lamp, Tund casts it off, while the moon shines into the hut, leavening a shadow of them on the walls. Tund offered her a cup and poured her some palm wine. After that, they began talking. His voice, calm and soothing, as they talked. Becky's eyes were watching him carefully, but no longer with the sharpness of before. Tund smiled inwardly, knowing that the moment was finally his. He moved closer, gently brushing his fingers against her hand, and began to speak in that low seductive voice he was known for. He said, softly, "I've been thinking about you. You're different from the others. Strong, independent." Becky smiled faintly. Still relaxed, but Tund could see the effect of his words were having. He leaned in a little closer, his voice now almost a whisper. "Do you know the difference between a man's manhood and a snake?" Becky, confused by question. She opened her mouth to respond. But before she could say anything, Tund began to whistle. The sound was soft at first, barely noticeable. But it grew louder, filling the room with an eerie tune. Becky shifted in her seat, suddenly uneasy, but it was too late. From the shadows, a dark shape began to stir. Becky's eyes widened as she saw it was a snake, long and menacing, slithering out from Tund's trousers. The cold smooth scales glistened in the dim light as the creature coiled around her. Tund watched, his face expressionless as the snake prepared to deliver its deadly bite. But something was different this time. Becky, who was not that terrified, suddenly reached into the folds of her wrapper and pulled out a small, white flute. Without a moment's hesitation, she blew into it, and the sound that came out was sharp, piercing, and filled the air with a strange energy. Tund's eyes widened in shock, as the snake froze in mid-strike. The snake was confused. Its eyes now locked on Tund, instead of its usual prey. She blew the flute again. And this time, the snake slowly turned away from her and slithered back toward Tund. Tund stumbled backward, fear flashing across his face for the first time. The snake, now under Becky's control, coiled around him, tightening its grip. He managed to gasp, struggling for breath, as the serpent constricted its fangs, hovering near his neck. "How did you do this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Becky's face was calm, her eyes cold and steady. "You're not the only one who knows how to control a snake. It's time you pay for your wicked acts. Also remember to say hi to favor." Before Tund could respond, the snake struck him, sinking its fangs into his neck. The venom spread quickly, paralyzing him almost instantly. His body convulsed, his breathing shallow as his life was drained out of him. Becky stood over him, her expression unreadable as Tund's body went still. The snake loosened its grip and slithered away into the darkness, leaving Tund on the floor. Long before Becky ever set foot in the village of Afor, her heart was heavy with grief and anger. The reason she had come to the village wasn't just to visit her aunt. It was to find answers. A few months earlier, she had lost her closest friend, Favor, in one of the mysterious deaths that had shaken the villages of Afore. The pain of losing Favor had cut deep, and Becky had made a vow to herself that she would find the person responsible. Favor and Becky had grown up together, inseparable since childhood, and Favor was full of life. Always laughing. Always bright. They had shared everything from their dreams to their deepest secrets. One evening, and Favor had told Becky that she was seeing someone new. A man she described as tall, handsome, and charming. Someone who made her feel like the only woman in the world. She never mentioned his name. She only said that this new man had something mysterious about him. Something she couldn't quite explain. 2 weeks later, Favor was found dead. Her body lay in the village square, cold and pale with strange bite marks on her neck. Just like the others, the villagers mourned her loss. But no one had answers. Becky was devastated, and her grief quickly turned to suspicion. Who was this man Favor had been seeing? Why hadn't she revealed his name, and why did no one know anything about him? Becky couldn't let it go. She knew that her friend's death wasn't some random accident. It had to be connected to this mysterious man. Her instincts told her that something dark was at play. So she began asking questions quietly and carefully. She wanted to know everything there was to know about the recent deaths. And soon enough, her search led her to Afore village. And as she laid eyes on Tund for the first time, she immediately suspected him. His looks, his charm, and the way he commanded attention. It all fit the description Favor had given. Tund was the kind of man who could seduce any woman. And her instincts told her that there is something he was hiding. Something she knew she couldn't confront him directly. Tund was too careful. Too clever. If she wanted to get to the bottom of the mystery, she had to be patient. She had to play her game well. Make him think she was just another woman drawn to his charm. And so she allowed him to approach her, to believe he was slowly winning her over. But all the while, Becky was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. Before coming to Afore, Becky had sought the help of a powerful oracle in her home village. The deaths were too strange, too similar to be the work of an ordinary snake. The oracle was known for seeing beyond the physical world, for uncovering hidden truths, and Becky hoped she would have answers. The oracle had welcomed Becky into a small hut filled with the smell of burning herbs and thick dark energy of the unseen. Becky explained everything, and Favor mysterious death, the bite marks, and the strange man her friend had mentioned. The oracle listened in silence. Her eyes closed, as if she was seeing things far beyond the walls of her hut. Finally, the oracle opened her eyes and spoke. "There is a man," she said in a low, raspy voice, "whose manhood is not like that of ordinary men. He carries a snake within him, a serpent of seduction and death. It is his weapon. He lures women to his bed, and once they are under his spell, the snake strikes, the venom kills, swiftly, leaving only the marks behind." She had suspected something dark, but this was beyond anything. She had imagined a snake man, able to charm women into their own deaths. It sounded impossible, but the deaths in Afore were too real, too frequent. "Is there any way to stop him?" Becky asked, her voice steady, despite the fear growing inside her. The oracle nodded slowly. "There is a way, but it is dangerous. You must use his weapon against him. The snake responds to a specific sound, a whistle that he uses to summon it. But with the right tool, you can control the snake. I will give you a flute, a sacred instrument that can protect you. If you play it at the right moment, the snake will obey you, not him." The oracle handed Becky a small silver flute, no bigger than her hand. It looked simple, But Becky could feel the power within it. This was her only chance, but be warned. The oracle continued. He is clever. He will try to seduce you, to make you trust him. You must let him believe that he has won. Only then, can you strike. Becky smiled. With the flute in her hand, a plan was forming in her mind. Becky set off for the village of Afor, ready to face the man she believed was behind her friend's death. From the moment she saw Tund, she knew she was right. He fit the description, perfectly, a handsome, arrogant man. The way he seemed to draw women in like flies to honey, she had to be careful. She couldn't let him see her true intentions. So she played along, allowing him to think he was getting closer, that she was falling for him. Just like the others. Little did Tund know that Becky was different. She wasn't just another victim. She was here for revenge, for justice, and with the oracle's flute, she had the power to make sure that Tund paid for what he had done to her friend and to all the other women who had fallen under his deadly spell. By morning, the village of Afor was buzzing with whispers. The villagers gathered in the market square, their faces filled with shock and disbelief. Tund, the man they had all admired, lay, lifeless, in the middle of the square. His body pale and still, beside him a snake. His deadly secret was out. Becky stood before the villagers. Her face calm. But her heart heavy. She had done what she came to do. She had avenged her friend. And brought an end to the terror that had haunted the women of Afor for so long. The village was silent as she spoke. Her voice steady and clear. I am not just an ordinary visitor, she said, her eyes scanning the crowd. I came here with a mission, to find the man responsible for my friend's death. And to put an end to the killings. Tund, with all his charm and good looks, was not what he seemed. He was the cause of all the deaths in this village. He used his snake manhood, hidden inside of him, to seduce and kill women. The villagers was stunned. They had never suspected Tund, the handsome, charming builder, who seemed perfect in every way, of being the source of so much pain and misery. For years he had lived among them, he gained their trust, all while hiding the dark truth behind his smile. They have been blinded by his charm. By his fine looks, never imagining that he was a monster in disguise. Sounds of disbelief spread through the crowd. Some of the women who had once giggled and blushed in his presence, now stood in silence, their faces pale with shock. Others bowed their heads in shame, realizing how close they had come to falling victim to his deadly seduction. But now the truth was clear. The reign of terror had come to an end, and the village was free from the darkness that had plagued it for so long. Years passed, and the story of Tund and his snake manhood became a legend in new culture. Mothers would tell the tale to their daughters, warning them of the dangers of falling for a man's charm without knowing his heart. A tale of Tund became a lesson for all. A reminder that not everything beautiful is good, and that sometimes danger hides behind the sweetest smiles. Becky's name became one of the popular names throughout the village. She was spoken of, with reverence, as a brave and wise woman. She was celebrated by the people. She had been with a monster and outsmarted him. And saved countless women from suffering the same fate as her dear friend. Her name was whispered, with pride, by the women of Afor. And a story was passed down from generation to generation. As for Tund, his name was forgotten. Buried in the dust of history. No one spoke of him anymore, except as a warning to those who might be tempted to use charm and deceit for evil. The villagers would remember the darkness he brought, but they would never honor his memory. The village of Afor thrived once again, the women were safe, the fear that had gripped the village for so long was finally lifted. Life returned to normal, and the people of Afor found peace. But the lessons of the past were never forgotten. The memory of what had happened remained.